The wind carried grit sharp enough to sting, lifting skirts of dust across the main road where boots scuffed and spurs clicked without hurry. The town held its breath. A woman staggered from the crooked doorway of the saloon, her cheeks swollen dark, lips split and bleeding, one arm wrapped around the bundle of 3 small girls clinging to her skirts. Their eyes were wide, their small shoes dragging through the dirt. Men leaned from porch rails, their faces shadowed beneath hats, eyes hard but voices hushed. No one moved to help. The saloon doors banged against each other in the wind, a hollow rhythm echoing against cracked walls and windows dulled by sand. Behind her, a man's curse broke through, rough and slurred. "Ain't no use for you, woman. 3 girls, that's all you give me? You ain't worth the whiskey in my cup." His laughter, jagged and cruel, spilled into the road as he reeled back inside. The girls pressed tighter against their mother. The woman did not answer, her face turned toward the emptiness of the road that stretched beyond the town, as though it alone could hold her upright. Her hand trembled against her children's shoulders. She started walking, every step dragging, the dust swallowing her footprints before they set. A shadow detached itself from the far end of the street. Boots struck hard and slow, the rhythm different from the lazy shuffle of townsfolk. A man stepped into sight, tall but bent by wear, shoulders heavy under a coat faded by years of sun and storms. His hat brim cut his eyes from view, though whispers followed him the way dust followed wagons. The broken rancher, they called him. He stopped in the road, the woman halting when she saw him. The girls clung tighter, one beginning to sob until her mother hushed her, voice thin as torn cloth. The rancher did not speak at once. He only looked, his silence heavier than the jeers that had trailed her out of the saloon. His hands, scarred and rough, curled against his coat as though remembering reins, or perhaps remembering a pistol long left behind. A wagon will creak somewhere down the road. A dog barked once, then quieted. The town waited. The rancher's voice broke through, low, gravel thick, carrying not the bite of command, but something worn deeper, grief sharpened into steel. "You're coming with me." The word struck harder than the saloon man's blows. The woman blinked, searching his face, but his eyes were gray stone set beneath the brim. No explanation, no question, only a sentence laid out plain as death. Her girls shifted, uncertain. She drew them close, torn between fear and a sliver of something else, something she hadn't known in years. Behind her, the saloon door creaked again. A laugh rolled out, mocking, careless. The rancher's gaze flicked past her, and the laughter stilled like a candle snuffed by wind. The door shut. The rancher stepped closer, dust rising around his boots. The smell of leather and dry sage carried in the heat. He did not reach for her. He only stood near enough that his shadow touched hers, and the girls huddled against the line where the 2 shapes met. She tried to speak, voice catching. "What?" "Because I said so," he cut in, not sharp but final. "And because you ain't got anywhere else." The words hollowed her chest, laying bare what she already knew. The road behind her held nothing but a house where fists waited, and the town's silence was worse than blows. Before her stood a man broken enough to carry ghosts, yet steady enough to make the dust itself pause. The rancher turned without another word, walking toward the edge of town where the horizon swallowed the road. The woman stood, trembling, her girls clutching at her skirts, until the smallest whispered, "Mama." She looked down at them, then back at the figure ahead, shoulders bent, but each step striking sure against the earth. Her feet began to move. The townsfolk watched, but none called out. Hats lowered, whispers stirred, but no one stopped her. The saloon stayed quiet. The wagon stood waiting at the far end, weathered wood and cracked leather reins hanging loose. The rancher climbed onto the board, the reins curling into his hands like old friends. He did not look at her when she lifted her girls into the back, one by one, then climbed after them. He only flicked the reins, and the horses started forward, hooves stirring dust into the hot stillness. The town shrank behind them, the saloon's crooked sign swinging in the wind, the men already drifting back to their whiskey and their silence. Only the dust remained, swirling in the wake of the wagon wheels, swallowing every trace. The woman held her daughters close as the road stretched ahead, endless and empty, the sky blazing without mercy. She did not know where he would take her, or why a man hollowed by grief would speak for her when no one else did. But she knew this much. When he said, "You're coming with me," it was not command nor kindness. It was something older, heavier, like a vow spoken into the dust, carried on the silence, meant to last longer than either of them. And so the wagon rolled on, deeper into the desert, leaving behind a road where cruelty laughed and silence watched. Ahead lay only dust, silence, and a story that had already begun. The sun beat down until the earth cracked, each hoofbeat striking a hollow drum against the parched road. The wagon wheels groaned with every turn, their wooden rims splintered from miles of hard travel. Heat shimmered across the horizon, bending the world into waves of fire. The woman sat in the back, her daughters pressed against her sides, their hair matted with sweat, lips dry and cracked. She wiped their faces with the edge of her sleeve, though it did little against the furnace air. Her eyes drifted to the man driving, his shoulders hunched but steady, reins fixed in his hands like anchors against the sun. He had not spoken since they left the town. The silence pressed heavier than the heat, broken only by the grunt of horses straining against the road and the faint rattle of a canteen swaying from the board. Dust clung to his coat, to his hat, to the creases of his scarred hands. At the first camp, night dropped sudden and sharp, coyotes yipping from the dark beyond the fire's glow. The rancher sat apart, his back against a boulder, eyes on the flames, though his thoughts seemed to burn elsewhere. The woman tucked her daughters close beneath a threadbare blanket, whispering lullabies in a voice gone hoarse. When the girl's breathing steadied, she dared to look at him. His jaw was rough with days of unshaven stubble, the lines on his face deep as canyons. His eyes caught firelight now and then, gray, cold, and restless, as though watching things only he could see. A horse snorted and stamped. He rose, checking the shadows, hand brushing the butt of a revolver holstered at his hip. The woman froze. She had thought him only a rancher, thought his silence was that of grief and labor. But his movements, quick, precise, the way his gaze cut into the darkness, spoke of another life. When he returned to the fire, she dared to ask, voice low, "What do they call you?" He looked at her, the silence stretching. Then, flatly, "Doesn't matter." She held his gaze. "It does to me." His mouth tightened. Then he turned back to the flames. "Name's been buried. All that's left is what I lost." The words sank heavy, ending the talk. By dawn, they were moving again. The desert spread wide, bones of cattle bleaching under the sun, vultures circling where death lingered. The girls whimpered with thirst until the woman pressed the canteen to their lips, sharing what little remained. The trail narrowed between canyon walls, red stone towering high and jagged. Hoofbeats echoed strangely there, bouncing back like ghost riders shadowing them. The rancher's eyes flicked to the cliffs, his body stiffening with each step. At a bend, the woman saw them first, dark figures perched along the rim, watching, still as stone. Her breath caught, hands clutching her daughters tight. The rancher's jaw clenched. He did not slow, only lifted his head as if he had been expecting them. The wagon creaked through the canyon, every rattle loud as gunfire in the silence. The figures did not move, only watched, their rifles slung easy. Dust drifted down from the cliffs where boots shifted against loose rock. At the far end, the trail opened wide to desert again. The wagon rolled free, the figures vanishing back into the stone. That night, the woman could not rest. She stared at him as he sat by the fire, sharpening a knife with slow strokes. Sparks leapt, each one flaring then dying like brief stars. "You knew," she whispered. He did not look up. "They've been trailing me for days." Her throat tightened. "Because of us? Because of me?" His voice carried no shame, only fact. The blade hissed against the stone. "They don't care about you. Not yet." The fire popped. One of the girls stirred, whimpering in sleep, and the woman held her tighter. "What did you do?" The rancher's hand stilled. For a moment, There was only the crackle of wood and the mournful cry of an owl. Then, quiet and rough, he said, "I survived." He set the knife aside and leaned forward, elbows on knees, eyes dark. "Raiders came through my land, took my wife, my children." His breath caught, jagged as broken glass. "I buried what was left. After that, I hunted." The woman did not speak. The silence stretched, the weight of his past pressing against the dark. "Men don't forgive what I became," he said at last, almost to himself. "They remember, and they follow." The fire burned lower, shadows stretching long and crooked. The woman held her daughters, staring at him with fear tangled in something else. A strange pull, a recognition of wounds carved deep and left unhealed. The night carried the scent of blood long spilled, the echoes of memory that clung to him like dust to his boots. By morning, they rode again, the road cutting through rolling desert, yucca and sage scattering under the hooves. The rancher's eyes never left the horizon, scanning the ridges where dust sometimes stirred, where riders might appear. The woman sat clutching her girls, every jolt of the wagon rattling her bones. Yet in the rhythm of hoofbeats, in the weight of his silence, she felt a strange certainty. Whatever hunted them, he would not turn away. The trail stretched endless, sun beating down, blood and memory trailing close behind. The canyon swallowed sound. Every creak of the wagon echoed off red stone walls, stretching long into the dark corners where the sun did not reach. Horses snorted, restless, their hooves scattering loose rock that clattered down into shadowed depths. The woman held her daughters close, her eyes darting from ridge to ridge. The cliffs leaned inward, pressing the trail into a narrow throat. Above, vultures circled, their wings scraping the silence. The rancher's gaze swept the rims. His hand rested near the revolver at his hip, his thumb grazing the worn grip. Dust clung to his coat. Sweat trickled down the line of his jaw, but his eyes stayed sharp, cutting from one shadow to another. A stone fell. It struck the trail just ahead, bouncing once before settling. The horses tossed their heads, ears flat, nostrils flaring. The rancher murmured low, steadying them, but his shoulders stiffened. Figures stepped from the cliff edges, dark shapes against the burning sky, rifles slung across their shoulders, hats pulled low. They moved with the patience of men who had waited long and had no reason to hurry now. The woman's breath hitched. One daughter whimpered, but she pressed the child against her, whispering sharply for silence. The rancher stopped the wagon. Dust rose, then stilled. He sat, unmoving, rein slack in his hands. From the rim above, a voice called down, rough as gravel. "Thought you'd slip quiet, did you?" The sound carried, bouncing off the canyon walls. More laughter followed, low and cruel. Boots scraped on stone as the riders began their descent, sliding down narrow trails carved into the cliffs. The woman's heart pounded. She gripped her daughters, her nails digging into their shoulders. The youngest began to cry, the sound breaking like glass in the canyon air. The rancher did not turn. He only spoke, his voice flat, as if carved from the stone itself. "Stay down." She pulled the children against her, shielding them with her body. Dust stung her eyes as the bandits came into view, a half circle forming around the wagon, rifles glinting, mouths twisted with hunger and spite. The leader stepped forward. His coat was long, frayed at the hem, his beard tangled and shot with gray. A scar split his cheek, pulling his lip into a permanent sneer. He spat in the dirt. "Never thought I'd see you again," he said, his voice thick with old hate. "But here you are, dragging a woman and her brats like some savior." He chuckled, dry and mean. "Tell me, gunfighter, you still got the iron in you? Or did the desert bleed it out?" The woman's eyes snapped to the rancher. "Gunfighter." The word cut through her fear, sharp and heavy. The rancher slid down from the wagon, his boots hitting the dirt with a thud. He did not reach for his revolver. He stood straight, though the years bowed his shoulders, and he met the scarred man's gaze without flinching. "You've trailed me long enough," he said. The scarred man grinned, showing yellow teeth. "We ain't here to trail anymore. We're here to finish. Rifle shifted. The air thickened. The canyon itself seemed to lean closer, waiting. The woman rose halfway, trembling, her girls clinging to her skirts. You can't. The rancher's hand lifted, cutting her off. His voice, low and steady, carried across the circle. No more talk. Dust swirled. The scar man's smile faded. His hand dropped toward his gun. The woman cried out, "Stop!" Her voice cracked against the stone walls, but it held something more than fear, defiance, sharp and sudden, a break from silence that made the bandits pause. She stood tall despite her shaking, her eyes burning with something that had survived fists and shame. The leader laughed, harsh and hollow. "Look at that. Even she's got more fire than you." But his laughter rang false. He had seen the way the rancher's hand lingered near the revolver, how still his body had gone, how the dust seemed to wait for a spark. The bandits shifted, uneasy. The woman's voice cut again, stronger this time. "You won't touch them. Not my girls. Not while I stand." The canyon fell silent. Even the vultures seemed to hang motionless overhead. The scar man's sneer faltered just a flicker. He spat again, but his eyes darted back to the rancher. So, the gunfighter hides behind a woman's voice now. The rancher's eyes narrowed, a shadow of something old and terrible flickering through the gray. His fingers brushed the revolver's grip, and for the first time, the bandits shifted their feet, rifles clutched tighter. The woman held her ground, breath heaving, her daughters clutched behind her skirts. She had no weapon but her voice, yet in that canyon, it rang like iron. The standoff hung there, dust, silence, steel waiting to sing, while the canyon walls swallowed the moment whole. The first gun cleared leather. A flash of steel caught the canyon sun, the sound of a hammer cocking sharp as a rattlesnake. In that instant, the air split. Rifles lifted, boots scraped, dust coiled into the sky. The rancher's revolver was already in his hand. The crack of the shot rolled through the canyon, echoing off stone like thunder. A bandit fell sideways into the dust, his rifle clattering against rock. The others shouted, diving for cover, shadows scattering along the canyon floor. The woman pulled her daughters down behind the wagon, pressing their heads into her skirts as bullets screamed overhead, splintering wood, kicking up shards of stone. The horses reared, eyes rolling white, ropes straining as the wagon rocked. The rancher stood alone in the open, coat whipping in the hot wind. His revolver barked again, the rhythm measured, steady, one shot, one fall. Dust leapt where each man dropped, the canyon filling with smoke and cries. But there were too many. Rifles fired back, sparks spitting off stone near his boots. A bullet tore through his sleeve, grazing his arm. He staggered but did not falter, jaw clenched, eyes fixed. The scarred man bellowed from behind a boulder. "You ain't walking out of here, gunfighter." The rancher's breath came hard, his hand reloading quick, shells clinking against the dirt. He crouched low, the revolver spinning back into his grip. His voice, low and cold, carried across the smoke. "I've already walked through worse." The woman lifted her head, eyes burning through the haze. She saw him, not broken, not bowed. A figure cut from iron, every movement precise, every shot ringing with the weight of man who had carried death before and carried it still. But the scar man rose, rifle leveled, his eyes locked on the wagon, on the woman shielding her daughters. His mouth curled into that twisted sneer. "Then let's take what you're protecting." The rifle cracked. The bullet tore through the air toward the wagon. The woman screamed, throwing herself across her daughters. But before the shot struck, the rancher was moving, faster than she thought a man could move, his body slamming into the wagon's side. The bullet tore through it instead of flesh, splinters flying. He turned, revolver snapping up, firing into the haze. A bandit fell, then another, the canyon floor littered with shadows that would not rise again. Still the scar man stood, his rifle reloading, his laughter raw and cruel. "You can't kill me, old ghost. You already tried once." The rancher's hand trembled on the revolver. His eyes locked with the scarred man's, the years of blood and memory closing tight around them both. He stepped forward, slow, relentless. Another shot cracked, grazing the ground at his feet. Another. Dust flew. The scarred man's grin widened, pulling the rifle up again. The woman rose. Her hand shook, but her eyes blazed. She stepped from behind the wagon, voice carrying above the gunfire, sharp as iron. "You won't touch them. Not while I breathe." The scar man turned, startled just for an instant. The revolver fired. But it wasn't the rancher's hand that pulled the trigger. The woman stood, smoke curling from the revolver she had snatched from the fallen bandit at her feet. Her breath heaved, arms trembling, but her aim had been true. The scarred man staggered, blood blooming against his chest. He dropped to his knees, eyes wide, then fell face first into the dust. Silence crashed down. The canyon held still, smoke drifting, vultures circling higher. The few bandits left alive scattered into the cliffs, their courage broken, their shadows vanishing into stone. The woman stood frozen, the revolver slipping from her hand, thudding into the dirt. Her daughters clung to her skirts, their eyes wide, their mother's voice still echoing in the stone. The rancher lowered his own gun, his chest rising and falling with slow, ragged breaths. Blood ran down his arm, but his eyes never left her. Not the woman beaten and cast aside, but the woman who had stood in the dust, faced death, and fired. He stepped closer, boots crunching in the silence. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then his voice low steady. "Wasn't me they feared. It was you." The woman shook her head, tears cutting through the dirt on her face. "No, you just lived," he said. His eyes softened, the steel breaking for the first time. "That's more than most can say." The girls clung tighter, their mother's arms wrapping around them. The canyon seemed to exhale, the shadows easing, the silence turning gentle. The rancher slid his revolver back into its holster. He looked at the bodies scattered, then at the horizon beyond the canyon. The horses stamped, restless, eager to move. He climbed back onto the wagon, bloodied but unbroken. He looked down at the woman, his voice carrying not as command this time, but as promise. "You're coming with me. Not because you need me, but because I need you." The woman lifted her daughters into the wagon, then climbed after them. Her eyes met his, steady now, no longer bowed. The reins snapped, and the wagon rolled forward, out of the canyon, into the blaze of sun where dust swallowed their trail. And the storyteller's voice, carried on wind and memory, lingered. They say the broken rancher was not broken at all. He was a man waiting for the right fight, the right souls to save. And they say the woman who stood in the dust, unarmed but unyielding, was the true fire that burned the dark away. Together, they wrote a legend, one the desert still whispers when the wind carries silence and the vultures wheel above.